All right, so I think that we can start already. So welcome everyone. Thank you for joining us for IALIC 2021 conference. My name is Lyubava Sichko, and today I will be the session chair. Okay, so today we have two presentations. So before we get started, let me give you a few housekeeping announcements. So each presentation runs for 30 minutes. 20 minutes for the presentation and 10 minutes for questions and answers, all right? If you have any questions during the presentation, please type them in the chat box on Zoom, okay? I'll read the questions after the presentation, and I also kindly request all participants to mute their microphones if you are not speaking. The session is going to be recorded and will be posted to the platform later. So now, without any further delay, we will turn the time over to our presenters. So first we have a group of presenters, Ana Sevilla Pavon, Silvia Rodila Rivas, and Kyria Finardi. So Ana works, both Ana and Silvia works at the University of Valencia. Ana's research interests are computer-assisted language learning, virtual exchange, and intercultural communication. Sylvia is interested in researching plurilingualism, social linguistics of immigration, and language attitudes. And Kyria Finardi, her research interest includes multilingualism, internationalization, and language policies in higher education. Our second presenter is Masome Raimi. Masome, please correct my pronunciation.
Yeah, that's right.
Yes, hello. Masome. Hello,
yeah,
Masome.
Yeah.
Okay.
Hello.
So this is our second presenter, and Masome is from the Free University of Brussels, and her research interests include intercultural issues in language teaching, learning and translation studies, and discourse analysis. So we're going to start, and the title of our first presentation is "Feels Like a Third Mother Tongue to Me, Exploring Learners' Attitudes Towards Minority Languages in the English as an Additional Language Class." Okay, Silvia, off you go.
Can I share my screen now?
Yes, go ahead.
Okay, thank you. So can you see my screen?
Yes, yes, we can see it.
Okay, so welcome to our presentation. I'm going to present on behalf of myself, of course, and my colleagues, Kyria Finardi and Ana Sevilla Pavon, who I was lucky enough to have as co-supervisors during my master's dissertation recently. And the data for this presentation has been taken from this project, as we will see later on. Okay, so I'm trying to, okay, yes, it was a little bit slow, so I thought it was not moving on. Okay, so I thought that first of all, we could reflect a little bit on the nature of plurilingual identities, in the sense, specifically on educational settings, in the sense that we have plurilingual individuals, in this case, plurilingual high school students, but they are part of a bigger whole, in this case, the school setting in which they are thriving. So this environment plays a role in the way they feel about the languages they speak, and also in their sense of belonging to a specific culture or to several cultures. And this can usually they go into directions. Of course, there are many in between positions, but this attitude from peers and teachers, mostly, and other educational agents, usually can go in the way of reinforcing their sense of identity or inhibiting their sharing of personal experiences, and consequently empowering them or not in terms of inclusion and exclusion dynamics within the classroom or within the school environment. So with these premises, the study that we carried out was done in a public secondary school in my hometown in Valencia. And demographically speaking, it's a typical high school, I would say, modern in our geographical location. And that means that it's ethnically diverse or culturally diverse. The data was taken mostly from interviews, as we can see here in the data collection instruments. We conducted four semi-structured interviews to teachers, so English as an additional language teachers, and 6 focus group interviews involving 46 students, aged 13 to 16, from the third year of compulsory secondary education. And some of the data also come from research journal notes, which involved classroom observation over a period of 3 months, and also the implementation of an awareness raising project. The few pictures that I have included in the presentations are from this project, as we will see. So in this project, many more students were involved. So even though the testimonies are from these 46 students, many more students were involved in this project. Okay, first, before discussing the results, I just wanted to explain the title of we chose for the presentation. One of the students, I think it's quite suggestive of some of the conclusions drawn from the results. Laura, let's say, it's a pseudonym, a 15 years old student. She was explaining her language biography, and she mentioned Portuguese. She said, "I love Portuguese. As I learned it when I was a child, it feels like a third mother tongue to me." And she said that very naturally. It's the case for many students in our context, since we have 2 official languages, Valencian or Catalan, we can call them either way, and Spanish. Then any other minority language or heritage language, it's considered a third language. Okay, so we chose this testimony for illustrating that point. Okay, I have structured the results in 2 main points. The first one is more connected to the environment, so not specifically the attitudes of the students, but the attitudes they find in the environment. So unfortunately, but not surprisingly, attitudes from teachers and peers are predominantly negative. Attitudes towards these minority languages present in the classroom. And we have highlighted 3 features: invisibility, mistrust, and learning obstacles. I will illustrate that with some of the testimonies. So this very first example, it was something that really struck me, because it was during the focus group interviews, and one of the Moroccan students we had in class was talking about what languages he spoke. No, where we were, he was asked about whether he found comparing languages useful for learning other languages. Okay, so we were discussing learning strategies, and he, by the way, mentioned that he had actually learned French before learning Valencian, and he gave some detail. ¿Cómo aprendiste francés? Porque vivía en Francia. And it's here in bold, because what struck me was one of her classmates' reaction. Even though they had been classmates for many years, their peers didn't know that he had lived in France or that he spoke French whatsoever. So this is a good example of how hidden or unnoticed usually minority languages go in the classroom. The next sample, the next example of negative attitudes towards minority languages is that of mistrust. This was unfortunately very common from classmates. Whenever they hear a language in high school, not only in their classroom or from their peers that they don't understand, they tend to react with mistrust and start imagining that they are being insulted or they are saying bad things about them. We have this example here, it's in Catalan, you may understand. Entre ells n'hi havia 3 que parlaven moltíssim en àrab, feien brometes en classe i de fet els altres deien, però què ha dit? Què ha dit? Que n'hi havia ahir, the teacher suggests something, she is explaining the attitude from the classmates of the speakers of Arabic, and this was not the only example, it was something that came out quite often. And finally, this is mostly from teachers themselves. It seems like acquisition and mastery of the languages of instruction, namely in our case Spanish and Catalan, Valencian, it's equal to academic success or school achievement in general. And we have this example in the first testimony. She was this teacher participant 3. She was explaining that the group of Moroccan students she had in class had no problem at all. And to illustrate that, she just said, "En mi parlen valencià." They speak Valencian with me. That meaning that if they speak Valencian, not Spanish, even Valencian, the minority language among the two, that means they are fully integrated and they have no problem. And on the other end, we have the opposite analogy. We had another teacher who explained that a few years ago, she had a Moroccan student that was very exposed to Arabic at home. He was immersed in this minority language. And for this teacher, that automatically meant that this student had trouble with Spanish and he got so confused. So we have this analogy between the mastery of the school languages of the languages of instruction and school success, and the opposite. If you speak a minority language, the prejudice seems to be that you are not fluent, not proficient in the languages of instruction, and consequently seen as a learning obstacle. Okay, that until here, that was as far as attitudes from peers and teachers is concerned. Beyond these attitudes, and even though we have said that these attitudes highly determine the way the individual students feel about their own language repertoires, they do acknowledge their plurilingual repertoires and all the languages they speak, and they especially feel strong about them in terms of socialization, sense of cultural belonging, and learning tool. The 3 sample works that we have here, these are from the awareness raising project, as I mentioned before, and they draw their plurilingual identities, they put them visually. So this was an example of how they feel about the languages, or how the languages they speak shape their worlds. Okay, so as for socialization is concerned, we have an example of a Moroccan student again. In a very short statement, we can quickly read it, go through it. He mentions the 4 languages that he speaks and how they fulfill different functions, different social functions or purposes. Yo en mi casa hablo 3 lenguas. Cuando estoy con mi padre y estamos en la mesa hablando, pues cosas así como una conversación que no sea tan profunda, pues lo hablamos en árabe. Pero una conversación mucho más larga, pues la hacemos en castellano. También decimos algunas cosas en francés, pero la mayoría hablo castellano con mis amigos todo. Y el inglés, pues cuando me toca hablar con gente extranjera o que habla otro idioma que no conozco. Of course, this distribution of social functions was very, very different from one student to another one, and we will talk about this later on. This is the case with all the other elements we're mentioning too, especially probably with the sense of cultural belonging. I saw some students who felt really proud of their immigrant or heritage background, but others were sort of ashamed. So for example, Omar, when talking about whether he felt more Moroccan or more Spanish or Valencian, he just said, yo soy de aquí. And a classmate reinforced, él es español. Like he was really convinced. So he feels very strong about where he belongs culturally. However, he said that he goes to Morocco often on holidays and he has a lot of family there. And this that didn't mean that when he reported that when he goes to Morocco, he doesn't feel an outsider either. So it's complex to define who they are from the languages they speak and the cultures they feel they belong to. And finally, they also mention the languages they speak, every language in the repertoire when talking about learning a foreign language, in this case, or a target language, an additional language. So do they use all the languages in their repertoires as a learning tool? Well, the answer, of course, also varied from one interviewee to another one, but something that came out quite often was the fact that they regarded it, comparing languages was seen as something useful only if the languages involved are close. So again, we have the same Moroccan student, we read a testimony before. I asked him whether he thinks it's important to compare languages, and this is his answer. He said, si se parecen, sí, pero si comparas el árabe con el inglés, lo tienes muy difícil. No te vas a apoyar en una lengua que es totalmente distinta de la otra. En algunos casos, las lenguas, aprender más te sirve porque tienes más cultura, pero en el caso de apoyar, el caso más especial sería el valenciano con el francés. Many students mentioned this. They said they felt they were very lucky to speak Valencian, even if it was not their mother tongue, because they had an advantage when learning French because of the similarity. So the perceived degree of closeness between languages was a factor for granting them useful or not in the eyes of plurilingual students and the way they learn. Okay, and to conclude, can someone tell me how long have I left? Because I was not checking the time. So
you still have 5 minutes.
Okay, great.
Yeah,
it was more or less the way I rehearsed it. Okay, so yes, to conclude, I'd say that it is complex to talk about plurilingual identities in multilingual school settings as a whole, as if we could draw conclusions that were true for all students, even if the sample was not huge, but it was considerably diverse and varied. Because plurilingual identities in nature, they are dynamic, they are complex. In terms of flexibility, dynamism, and we can say that plurilingual identities change a lot over time and over the life history of every individual. So probably the same students, if we interview them 5 years ago, they will give us very different answers. And if we interview them in 5 years, probably they will give different answers. So it's something that changes over the lifetime of individuals. And also because it's not just a matter of the way they feel, as if they were closed compartments, but it's highly determined by their environment. And as we saw before, the pressure, either if it's positive or negative, from peers, from teachers, is really plays a huge role in terms of the way they feel about their languages. And finally, when we talk about minority languages, we talk about languages that are a minority within the classroom. But of course, it's not the same if the minority language is a Latin American indigenous language, or if it's an African language, or if it is a European language. So of course, again, we have bigger issues going on, not only what happens in the individual or in the classroom, but what happens in the Valencian community in general, in Spain. And we have the international or macro trends of language hierarchies, and we know the value attached to each language is not the same. So that plays, all these factors play a role within each individual. And as we said, it's very complex to generalize because we had very different situations. Some students had a very, they were very proficient in the minority language or in the heritage language, while others had just a secondary or distant relationship. And especially the third factor, emotional attachment, the way they felt about the languages was very different. I had a Romanian student, she was one of the interviewees, she was very eager when she said that they only spoke Romanian at home because it's their language. But others, it was like we had to insist a lot just to find out they spoke a minority language at home in the first place. So all these factors make it complex, and also shed some light on the nature of plurilingual identities. And that was all. These are our references. I hope you enjoyed the presentation, and I think we have time in case you want to go into detail or.
Okay, Silvia,
thank
you very much. Thank you very much,
Thank
Silvia, Anna, Kiria. So yes, we will go ahead and probably take 5 minutes for questions now. Okay, so just a reminder, everyone who is here now, please be sure to type your questions in the question box or just unmute your microphone. Let's see if we have any questions. Okay, so since nobody's ready to ask a question yet, I'll take the opportunity to ask. Silvia, what was the rationale of the study? Why have you decided to research this topic?
Well, the focus here has been attitudes and the plurilingual identities, but my master's dissertation was about plurilingual pedagogies in general. So, well, as you present before, my research interest involve sociolinguistics of immigration. I have been an immigrant myself, and I am a returned immigrant now. So I have always been interested in the relationship between language and identity, mobility. So since I had to do something within the classroom, I managed, with the help of invaluable help of Kiria and Anna, they guide me through the process to, I don't know, combine both. And yes, like the plurilingual pedagogies were a part of studying the relationship between immigration, language, or ethnicity, identity, and vice versa. So they sort of fed each other. And for this presentation, we are focusing on identities, but it was only one of the aspects that I covered on my dissertation.
All right, thank you. Kiria?
Yes, I don't know if I don't know if I can ask a question or make a.
Oh, of course.
I thought you were going to answer it, Kiria, but it's okay.
I also thought that she was going to add something, but she wants to answer.
Well, in a way, it is. It is more of a comment than a question, really. First of all, congratulate Silvia not only for her work during the master, but also what she's been following up and doing now during her PhD. And the comment is in the sense that I've studied a little bit about teachers' beliefs and beliefs in general. And it is interesting to see that despite access to theories and to different methodologies or approaches during teacher education, teachers are very much influenced by their beliefs. In fact, their beliefs sometimes guide more their practice than the theory in which they receive. And so I think that works like the one Sylvia is doing, the one she did in the master and what she's now carrying out during the PhD is very important in the sense that perhaps by having teachers question, reflect about their beliefs is the best or the let's say the most effective solution to perhaps change our attitudes and pedagogies in terms of being more inclusive to multilingualism. That is only the comment. Thank you and congratulations, Sylvia. I'm suspect.
Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. Thank you, Kyria. And we've got one more question from Civil. So Civil is saying, thank you for the really interesting talk. Just interested in what you would define as a difference between plurilingual and multilingual students.
Okay, so shall I answer the question now?
Yeah, you have 2 minutes. Yeah, go ahead.
Okay, yes, well, not all the authors agree about this. So some people use multilingual, the term multilingual for everything. But usually multilingualism is more connected to societal aspects, and plurilingualism about individuals. And then it's also the terminological choice of the European framework of the Council of Europe, the European framework of reference for languages. So in the last update, in 2016, they made this distinction, and the term plurilingualism has been increasingly used in the literature since this change in the framework. So I don't know if I've answered it, because okay, this is what I have done in my work and the way I see it, but of course there are other ways of seeing it, and some people, they are just multilingual and they think they're synonyms.
Okay, thank you very much, Sylvia. Remember that you can always continue your discussion in the private, probably messages, right, in chat box, and continue talking on the topics that you're interested in. So thank you very much. Thank you, Sylvia, for this illuminating presentation. And now I would like to give the floor to our next presenter. She is Masome Raimi, speaking on news media translation and its intermediacy role in times of conflict, the Joint Comprehensive Plan of Action. Sylvia, can I please ask you stop sharing the screen so that Masome can share her presentation? Okay, Masome, can you try to share your screen now?
Okay, shall I start?
Yeah, go ahead.
Okay. Hello, everyone. It's a great pleasure for me to talk about my research at the 21st IALIC conference today. In this paper, we have focused on the media representation of the global debates over the Joint Comprehensive Plan of Action, or known as Iran's nuclear deal, to examine and discuss the key role of journalistic translation in mediating between languages and cultures in this conflictual situation in the Iranian context. In this talk, I will start with a brief overview of the Joint Comprehensive Plan of Action, and then I will briefly talk about the aims, the data, and methods of analysis we have relied on, and last part is dedicated to the data analysis and discussion. The Joint Comprehensive Plan of Action, just a short abbreviation for that, is an international agreement on Iran's nuclear program between Iran, Germany, France, the UK, Russia, China, and the United States, reached after long-running negotiations on July 14, 2015 in Vienna, Austria. Under the agreement, Iran reduced some of its nuclear activities. The International Atomic Agency would have regular access to all Iran's nuclear facilities in order to monitor and review the nuclear activities. In return, the US sanctions and the EU and the UN would be lifted. The conflict over the success or failure of Iran's nuclear deal and its implementation started immediately after signing the agreement. Since then, the conflict between its supporters and opponents has been one of the most controversial media topics all over in the world. Supporters of the deal have claimed that the agreement is a well-negotiated deal, a remarkable accomplishment which is necessary for world peace and security in a time of conflict and war. In contrast, the deal's opponents in the US consider the deal as a historic mistake or one of the worst and most one-sided transactions the United States has ever entered into, or even as a decaying rotten agreement. The deal has been similarly opposed by some Iranians in Tehran who believe that almost nothing has been achieved from this agreement and it did not benefit really Iranians. Both Iranian and the US officials accuse each other of violating the deal and of not delivering on their promises, and ultimately in May 2018, the US president officially announced the United States withdrawal from the deal. The US sanctions against Iran returned as it was before the nuclear deal, and since the withdrawal of the US from this international agreement, unrest has shaken the Middle East many times. Iran has abandoned some of its commitments and resumed some of its nuclear activities gradually. In the past months, there were some negotiations between the signatories of JCPOA in Vienna, hoping to resume the nuclear deal. But after Iran's presidency's election in last June, the negotiations were stopped. Now, the fate of JCPOA and the possibility of negotiations remain somehow uncertain. To cut this story short, the media representation of the conflict regarding Iran's nuclear deal as a success or failure still continue to be one of the controversial topics represented in the media today. In this conflictual situation, it is therefore important to examine how the debates over JCPOA travels from the West to Iran. For the purpose of this study, we obtained data from the online archive of the Iranian newspaper Kayhan. It means universe in English. It is one of the oldest and very influential newspaper in Iran in pre- and post-revolutionary Iran. It has done a vast coverage of the topic under examination in this study, JCPOA. We focus on the time period of 14 July 2015, when the deal was signed, to 23 April 2022, the end of data collection for this study. The data I use in this paper is extracted from a larger corpus in my PhD research, and the Persian articles that incorporated translation were ended up in our corpus. The source materials were obtained from different articles, political speeches, interviews published by different non-Iranian news media, magazines, official websites, and Twitter. We compared the translations with their originals. In our corpus, there are numerous shifts in the translation. However, for the purpose of this paper, we discussed the instances which can influence intercultural mediation and communication. We postulated that the relationship between discourse, ideology, power relations, and censorship and their representation in news translation influences intercultural mediation in the context of Iran. We believe that power is often legitimized and delegitimized in discourses, but power relations also limit and control discourses through different forms of regulatory procedures. Thus, power is discursively realized, and we mainly focus on the ways in which linguistic and rhetorical devices are used in news discourse, and this power. This study presents and discusses only the potential cases of censorship practices that function as as a combination of two acts to legitimize certain views and delegitimize other. By drawing on CDA, we actually relied on the CDA critical discourse analysis in this research. We would like to show how power and ideology can influence selection, recontextualization, and translation, and to explore how and to what extent it can influence intercultural mediation. In this paper, we aim to examine the intermediatory role of news translation and censorship at two levels. At the macro level, we will focus on selection and recontextualization of interlingual discourse strands. And at the macro level, we will focus on manipulations in translations. In particular, we analyze the code and subtle strategies in translation, which possibly lead to a range of transformation in meaning and representation, and the legitimation of social actors and actions. First, at the macro level of analysis, we relied on the critical discourse analysis by the German linguist Siegfried Jäger, and particularly we employed a structural analysis of discourse strand. Discourse strand, which is also referred to as discourse thread or themes, is a flows of discourse that center on a common topic. In this structural analysis, we identified, categorized, and coded the discourse strand and sub-strands which were entangled with the main strand of the JCPOA. We aim to show which discourse strands were frequently recontextualized and focused in the Persian articles. According to Jäger, if a statement occurs frequently, it has sustained effects and strongly solidifies a particular knowledge. The analysis in this at this stage sheds light on how censorship affects visibility or invisibility of certain themes embedded in the power dynamics of the newspaper. The background figure I have used here is reprinted from Jäger's critical discourse analysis and introduction, which is in German. It shows, this picture shows a discursive knot. According to Jäger, various discourses are entangled with one another like vines or strands, which are in constant motion and form a discursive myelin mass. It is exactly this mass that we attempted to untangle. However, I have used this picture and I use my data, the results on the background picture here. We untangled other discourse strands which were entangled with the strand of JCPOA, such as the US failure against Iran and Iranian Islamic resistance and unity, Iran's strength and defiance, Iran's regional role and influence, failures of Rouhani's administration. Then we examined with what frequency particular sub-strands are incorporated in the articles of Kayhan through recontextualization process. We realized that a failure of the JCPOA and also as a sub-strands and also failure of the US pressure against Iran are the discourse strands that recontextualize in articles very frequently. Actually, different European and American news discourse, in addition to reaction and remarks of prominent officials, were included and discussed in the articles of Kayhan to substantiate these two failures. The analysis of these, actually the discourse strand already showed the selection and recontextualization of the discourse strands were in line with the Kayhan's discourse position or ideological positions. Then second, at the micro level of analysis, we relied on Driscoll and Vodok's discourse historical approach. The selected key strategies from their approach in this research are nomination and predication. Nomination, which also called referential strategies is negative, positive, self, and other discursive construction of social actors, objects, events, processes, and actions. And predication is the discursive categorization and qualification of social actors and objects and the rest. And there are actually these strategies in constructing and delegitimizing and legitimizing social actors and actions are communicated through different linguistic tools and rhetorical devices. Applying these two concepts, we have tried to investigate and show how referential and predicative strategies are used to label and evaluate social actors and actions, which lead to the legitimization and thus to the construction of new image of them in the translations. The results at this level of analysis showed that censorship is exerted via different strategies, including omission, addition, substitutions, addition of in-text comments, and summarization in the translation. The dominant strategy was clearly omission, through which censorship was practiced. Previous also research has identified omission as being the key strategy in news translation, like the research by Belisa and Bassman. The articles constructed by Kehan supposed to be a translation of the original articles, but they are considerably, we realize that, summarized in the articles of Kehan. Also, the selection and recontextualization of certain discourse strands at the macro level align newspaper ideological agenda. The result revealed that in number of examples, the manipulation in the translations carried out, which aimed to tone down the unfavorable predications and references involved in the discursive construction of in-group identities, including allies. Through some of these transformations, specifically involved in a construction of a positive self, we realized that the newspaper somehow played a peace-making role in mediation. However, we realized that the negative references to the actors, for example, the Iranian leaders, officials, and allies, and the actions, issues related to the nuclear deal, the activities in the region, and the human rights were often censored in translations, either through omission of the references or substitution it with different other references. Actually, by doing so, the newspaper presents a much more positive picture of the actors' praxis by downplaying the negative references in the translation. All negative references to GCPOA, for example, a historical mistake and a root and the agreement, not only remain intact in the translations, but also overemphasized and used to substantiate the failure of the nuclear deal. Here, I will show an example from my corpus to show how manipulation in translation can have an impact on the intercultural communication and how the newspaper aligns the text with its own ideological agenda. On the left is the source discourse fragment by the former High Representative of the Union for Foreign Affairs and Security Policy, Federica Mogherini, which was recontextualized in one of Kehan's articles. On the right is the translation by Kehan, and in the middle is my literal translation. First, I will talk about the types of transformation which occurs in this translation. I discovered that the predication which realized through linking verbs in the source text is Europe feels an interest. It is replaced with an action verb which express positions. Europe feels that it has interest in the translation. In Mogherini's speech, interest, which means involvement, the feeling of wanting to be involved in something, is translated as interest in a plural form, which means advantage in the translation. When I found actually this example, I tried to go beyond the linguistic shift, as Baker also in 1997 suggests that a translation goes far beyond linguistic mediation, and language sometimes becomes a means to an end. So a translation might be a part of broader political agenda. So I try to link it to a broader context of the newspaper. I realized that, in fact, the discursive construction and delegitimation of the other European signatories of JCPOA is communicated through predication strategies and can be observed in some of Kayhan's articles to argue that the EU use threatening language and show their hostility towards Iran, towards us, and they are so therefore untrustworthy. At a general level, to substantiate the other West's unreliability, Kayhan recontextualized its articles based on two main themes. First, to show that the interests of the EU are in line with the interests of the US and the EU's economic interests from JCPOA. In doing so, Kayhan seeks to prove that the EU has benefited the most from JCPOA, that Europe's policies are aligned with those of the United States, that it does not really support Iran, and that is not fulfilling its obligations under the agreement. Actually, the construction of self and other in translations not only align with the newspaper ideological agenda, but also resulted in a different representation of social actors. For example, here in this example, Mogherini and actions, nuclear deal, and ultimately shifts in meaning and reality. Following the signing of the agreement, hardliners in Iran expressed concern about the West influence. They expressed their opposition to further negotiations with the West because it could open doors for infiltration in the economic, political, cultural, and security fields. Just to conclude, all practices of news production, including the selection of certain interlingual discourses, recontextualization, translation, and censorship in Kayhan are influenced by state Occidentalism. This ideological representation of the other, the West, negatively refers to Occidentalism, a reaction to Orientalism. In Iran, there is a state and non-state Occidentalism. In the state Occidentalism, the West is often represented as imperial, arrogant, and interventionist. This ideology about the West may be preserved by non-state Occidentalism as well, but Iranian Occidentalism also takes a nationalistic approach, which manifests itself as powerful, who develop different technologies, such as missile technologies and biotechnologies. Of course, this way of representation plays a crucial role in constructing a new reality in terms of social actors and actions, and consequently influences intercultural communication, foreign relations, implementation of JCPOA, and shaping of a negative perception of the West in Iran. We conclude that power relations and ideological positions of newsmakers in Kayhan actually strongly influence the translations. Translation is inseparably related to ideology, as also Waldon mentions, and often part of broader political agenda, therefore sometimes promoting conflict rather than harmony. It is in line with also another quotation by Waldon, who believes that news translation is indeed an ideal site to reflect the existence of conflicts, but may also contribute to existing conflicts. So these are some of the references I have relied on. And this is the end of my presentation. Thank you very much.
Okay.
And, yeah, your comments and questions are more than welcome.
All right. Thank you very much, Masumeh, for your excellent presentation. It's a difficult topic, but I consider that very important and essential nowadays. So we will go ahead and check if we have any questions. So we have some time for questions now. Let's see. Any questions from the audience? Okay, it seems that everything is clear, and thank you very much once again for your presentation. Now let's give a round of applause to all of our speakers. Thank you very much. Okay, I would like to thank our speakers for sharing with us their available knowledge and the audience for their attendance. Now, I was asked for a little favor. Can you please turn on your cameras so that we can take a picture of everyone who is here today before we... Okay, can you please, guys, turn on your cams for a second? Okay. Okay, thank you very much. So that we can take... Margarita, are you going to take a picture? Yeah, okay, perfect. Yeah, good. All right. Okay, great. So thank you very much, everyone. Now we're going to have a lunch break, and our next parallel sessions will begin at 1:30 p.m. All right. So have rest and see you there. Bye-bye, everyone.